guys, welcome back to my channel. So, obviously from like the title or thumbnail, you can tell this is going to be a two-part wrap-up. So, this is going to be part one of my wrap-up for the month of March. March, like I said in all of my previous videos, March was bonkers for me. I had so much stuff that I was doing that was book-oriented, and I was just reading a lot. Like, reading was like my whole life in March. If I wasn't reading, I was at a book event. So it was a thing. It was a thing. Let's leave it there. So I'm gonna try something out this month because, okay, grand total number, I read 27 books in March. I know. Who is she? Where did she come from? I don't know. I'm going to blame that, or not blame it, I'm gonna say that that was mainly in part for the book events because I was cramming a lot of the titles that I knew I was gonna meet the authors of before the event, and then I was in that like craze after the event where I was just like so in the mood to read all of the stuff that people were talking about there. So it was just like, it was a reading month. So what I'm thinking about for this month, and I might do it every month, I might just kind of do it for months that I read a lot of romance, but you can see where I'm going with this. I read a lot of romance, and I'm going to split this video in between two parts. I'm going to do a romance wrap-up of all of the romance, whether that is new adult, smut, all of the above things. I'm going to do a romance wrap-up, and then I'm going to do an everything else wrap-up. So this wrap-up is my everything else, because I know a lot of you here are not necessarily here for romance, but I also want to give the romance books a fair chance instead of just being like, I read some smut. I want to actually talk about them because it's a newfound love of mine, and I feel like romance is not represented very often in the booktube world, so I want to start giving it some love. I might not read enough romance to justify making it a completely separate wrap-up video every month, but at the rate that I'm going, it's happening that way. But that 27 books that I said that I read was split almost evenly. I read 15 in this video that I'm going to discuss, and I read 12 romance books. So both videos are going to be pretty lengthy, so without further ado, let's get into the books that I read. I think I'm going to slide on over and bring the card over so I can start filling it up. And like I have done in the previous couple months wrap-ups, I'm actually going to go through them in the order that I liked them. I'm not going to go through chronologically, I'm just going to go from least liked to most liked. So the end of the video is like the best book that I read that month. Are you with me? All right, let's go. So unfortunately, the only 2-star book that I read this month was also my book club book that I read. I have been running a book club over on my Facebook group. I will leave it linked down below if you guys would like to join, but we are reading a lot of backlist titles, which also opens up the door to read things that are dated. And that, unfortunately, is my opinion of the March book that we read, and that is The Winter's Curse by Marie Rutkowski. I know this is a beloved trilogy, like, this is kind of an OG YA, like, original booktube loved series. I personally didn't think that it held up. I never read it back in the day. This was my first time reading this, and it was full of tropes, and I expect that from older YA because at the time, the tropes weren't overdone. So it was kind of new and fresh and stuff, but there was just not enough in this book to make me love the characters, care about the story. I really didn't care for Kestrel as a main character. I loved her name. I'm a big fan of the name Kestrel for some reason. I really like it. I cared more about, what was his name? Aaron. I listened to the audiobook. They said it Aaron, but I'm pretty sure it's Aaron. I liked his story way better. I want him to be the protagonist of this series. Like, get rid of Kestrel. She was a little whiny and obnoxious and full of herself, and I just want to follow Aaron's story because he was way more interesting, and I feel like he has a much more developed backstory than Kestrel does. So unfortunately, this is the first book I'm talking about, which means it was a 2-star read. It was my least liked book of the month. All right, the next book I'm going to talk about, we're moving into the 3 stars, but I finally got around to One of Us is Lying by Karen M. McManus. So this is a YA thriller. So that being said, this automatically kind of, this is going to be controversial for me to say it. It kind of knocks a point off for me just because it doesn't have the reread factor. I'm not going to say that for all thrillers. There are definitely some thrillers and mysteries that are out there that are just fucking masterpieces. But this one, it was nothing spectacular. I think it was well made, and I feel like there's not that much in the mystery genre when it comes to YA, so this was a well done one in a very limited class. But ultimately, I kind of found it to be, like, forgettable. I'm being real harsh at the beginning of this video. I swear I get nicer as the video goes on. I promise. But I did give this 3 stars. I enjoyed it while I read it, and that's the end. Unfortunately, the next book is gonna surprise you guys because this was one of my most anticipated titles of the year, but The next book I want to talk about is also a 3-star, somewhat forgettable book in my opinion, and that is Once and Future by Amy Rose Capetta and Corey McCarthy. This has already come out. This actually came out in March, so I read it like at the very beginning of March, right before it released. And while I think that this has really good aspects, it has amazing representation of diversity in all forms. Like, it's a sci-fi retelling of King Arthur, where King Arthur is like reincarnated through the generations, and this time around he turns into a teenage girl. It's such a great concept, and it has all of the makings to be something that I should love, but I feel like it was just missing something for me to just like fall over that line. So it has amazing LGBT plus representation in it. Everyone in this future society is gender fluid. In fact, like, they make fun of, okay, basic plot synopsis, like I said, it repeats the King Arthur tale over and over and over again. In each reiteration, the character Merlin ages backwards, but he is aware of what's happening every time. He basically has to go find the King Arthur figure and tell him what's going on and proceed with the tale. But it was kind of comical that the character of Merlin is coming from the past and working his way up to the present day, and everyone just kind of makes fun of him for having very close-minded concepts when it comes to diversity, where he just doesn't understand they, them pronouns or same-sex couples. Like, he understands it, but he's just kind of taken aback because he comes from a time where it's somewhat now, where it's not as common and it's just starting to be discussed, and he's just like, oh, okay, that's cool, I guess. So it's so forward thinking, but that's where it kind of ends for me. I feel like the plot was never anything that I was excited to get back to. Like, it was kind of a struggle to get through this. So it was disappointing to me that like it had all of the makings to be something amazing, and ultimately the actual like meat of the plot was kind of lacking in my opinion. So I gave it 3 stars. I still highly recommend checking it out just for all of the laughs. There's a lot of joking in it. There's good representation. All of that alone is worth reading it. Just don't go in with maybe super high plot expectations. The next book that I want to talk about is actually a classic. I finally started dipping into classics again. I finally got around to reading The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. This is one of my unread classics, and obviously with the show coming out, I kind of wanted to know what was going on. So here's the thing. One, it's been a long time since I've read classics critically. Like, it's been a long time since I've been in school and I've actually had to sit down and evaluate all of the symbolism and themes and tones in a classic piece of literature. 2, I didn't love this one. Like, it reads really easily. It does not read like a hard classic because it's set in like modern language, so it's not Old English that you have to decipher like Shakespeare or something. So it's easy to read, but that being said, I feel like it was not easy to suspend belief, in my opinion. I have since watched a lot of reviews, and I agree wholeheartedly with what Murphy, I'll leave her channel linked down below. She reads classics constantly, but I feel like she hit the nail on the head with what I was like struggling with this book. So this is essentially a dystopian story. It's set in a world where within one generation we have backtracked huge in the patriarchal society norms. So basically like pregnancy is almost non-existent. Like we're struggling to keep the population going. And that being said, women kind of take on this role of a handmaid, where your role is essentially to just provide offspring to the few fertile men that are left. The issue that I had with this is that I feel like I probably could have gotten on board with that had it been set years in the future, maybe centuries in the future, and humanity has evolved to accept its fate at that point. But I feel like it was taking place in the modern world, and within this one woman's lifespan, she went from being married, having her own kid, having a happy, normal life, to becoming a handmaid. So it was only within like a maybe 10 to 30 year time span that this change happened, and everyone just kind of rolled over and accepted it. And I have a really hard time accepting that humanity would just give up like that, and that women wouldn't fight for their rights more within such a short time period, and within not as much extreme stuff causing this to happen. Like, I understand it's a population issue, and I understand the drastic measures that they went to, but I just have a really hard time accepting that we went from a free-thinking, normal feminist society to the state that we were in So that being said, that's literally where my thoughts were the whole time. I was just like angry with everybody the whole time. The writing, I think, was okay. I liked the concepts that were thrown into it. I feel like there was a lot of symbolism if I could have looked into it more, but I just kind of struggled through the whole concept of the story, if that makes sense. So I gave it 3 stars. It's not my favorite classic. Probably won't revisit it, but I'm curious to see the show because, God, it was graphic. Like, I know people who read that in high school. Do you know how embarrassing it would be to read that in high school? Like, it's very graphic with the sex. Like, they talk about coming, and I'm just like, whoa now. Imagine a high schooler reading that out loud in class. It's gonna be super awkward. So, those are my thoughts on that. The next book I want to talk about is the second book in the Remnant Chronicles trilogy, The Heart of Betrayal by Mary E. Pearson. We read The Kiss of Deception in my first month with my book club, and I have since continued on with the series. This one, I gave 3 stars. This one suffers from second book syndrome, in my opinion. We are kind of just getting from point A to point B. We established kind of the story. We built a little bit more of the world, like our eyes were opened slightly more to the world in this book. But ultimately, it was kind of forgettable. Like, I couldn't tell you, like, major plot points that happened in this book. But I'm invested enough with the little, like, tidbits that she's dropped of, like, the magic system and where the world is going to definitely want to pick up book 3. But ultimately, this one, in my opinion, has middle book syndrome, which is unfortunate. So I gave it 3 stars. I still am enjoying the series, and I can't wait to get to book 3, but this one was just kind of meh. Okay, and the next one is possibly my biggest disappointment of the year thus far. We're only so far into the year, but so far this is my biggest disappointment. And it's still not at the bottom of my list, but it was just expectations didn't meet reality. And that is King of Scars by Leigh Bardugo. And I feel like the rest of the world kind of agrees with me. I know there are some people who still loved this. They loved it more than the Six of Crows books. Some people just hated it. I fell in the middle. It was just disappointing to me. And it's frustrating to me because Nikolai was my favorite character from the original Grisha trilogy, and his reappearance in the Six of Crows books was just like a ray of sunshine. He is just my favorite cinnamon roll to read about, so I was ecstatic to have a book about him and see him face his personal and literal demons in this book. And it was just not good. Like, it was way too long. It took way too long to get to the end point. Like, I feel like we went through so many things that didn't really result in anything. And the ending, I'm on board. I know I'm not going to talk about the ending. I'm not getting into spoilers. But the ending is very polarizing. People were either so disappointed with it or they loved it. I loved it. And I'm going to leave it there because it'll get into spoilers for all of the series. But I feel like, okay, I didn't love reading Nikolai's point of view. I liked Nina's, I liked Zoya. Zoya was probably my favorite perspective to read from this book, but I feel like all of the little individual perspective changes were stilted, like they didn't mesh well. There was just so much that happened in this that I felt like was filler, and it was frustrating. Like, I wanted to love this so much, and it just wasn't great. It's frustrating. Gonna leave it there. 3 stars. The next book was a pleasant surprise, actually, for me, and that is The Way You Make Me Feel by Maureen Gu. I read this just as a piece of fluff. I really needed something that was just happy and easy and very little conflict. And this was exactly that. If you're looking for a summer read this summer, definitely this. It's got all of, like, the good feels in it. So this basically follows Clara, who is very, very close to her dad. Her parents are separated. They were teen parents, and her mom is off living the internet influencer lifestyle off all over the world, and she's not very present in Clara's life. But her dad is super present. Her dad runs a really well-known established food truck in the community, and Clara is a gem of a character. Like, she is so unique. She's one of those quirky characters that's lovable, and she is not the manic pixie dream girl, even though she has a lot of quirks. She is on the better side of the line of being a quirky, fun character without being that, if you know what I'm saying. Like, she's the good side. So it basically follows her as she goes through a summer of working on the food truck with kind of her enemy in high school and then becoming friends, and then her getting in a relationship with a guy. So it's a whole story about relationships, whether that is with her family, her friends, or her boyfriend. And it was just marshmallows. Like, it was just so cute and happy and wholesome, and it tackled a lot of actual issues. Like, it tackled a lot of diversity and relationship issues, but it was very realistic to a teenager's life. Like, it didn't try to overstep its bounds with, like, unnecessary obstacles that teenagers aren't facing regularly. So it was just, I loved it. I really did. I gave it 3 stars, but it was a high 3 stars. So I'm gonna recommend this. I thought it was so good. I really didn't expect to love it as much as I did. Like, I liked it more than King of Scars, okay? That's saying something. Okay, the next 2 books I want to talk about are my 3-star to 4-star transition books, but I'm going to kind of go about them backwards. So I read the first 2 books in the Immortal series by Tamara Pierce. So I read Wild Magic and then I read Wolf Speaker. Book 2, Wolf Speaker, was my 3-star book, and I adored the first one, so this was my 4-star book. So, I read this with my friend Ange. I will leave her linked down below. She is a new booktuber who is just so cute and precious, and I just love her so much, so go give her channel some love. We buddy read book 2 together, so I got caught up by reading book 1, and then moving into the buddy read with this one. So, we adored this first book, because both of us are horse girls. We've grown up riding our entire lives, and this was a very animal, specifically horse-oriented book, and it was so pure. Like, it's a very young, I would almost constitute this as middle grade. I'm pretty sure Dane is actually maybe 12 or 13 at the beginning of this book, and it's just very healthy, young fantasy that was so refreshing. Like, God, I wish I read this when I was younger. Like, this book would have been everything to me because it's all about animal companions. Like, she can communicate with animals, which means she can talk to her horse. That is a dream of mine. Hello. So I adored this. This was my 4-star book, and book 2 was my 3-star, mainly because it wasn't as horse oriented. Like, it was still a solid book, but it dealt obviously more with a pack of wolves and how humans are kind of infiltrating their pack area. So it touched a little bit on like the deforestation concept, but in a high fantasy setting. So I adored these books. I'm so glad that I got around to them and that I read them with Ange, and these books brought us together. So this is my 3 and 4-star transition period right there. Staying in the same vein, I read my first manga this month. I know, we're all so proud of me. But if there was anything to get me into a foreign genre and get me to fall in love with it, it is this little precious book. This is How to Treat Magical Beasts, Mine and Master's Medical Journal, and this is by Kazaya. This is volume 1. This was everything I could have possibly wanted in a manga or graphic novel. It's this precious story about kind of a veterinary's assistant who specializes in like magical beasts. So this is basically the veterinary's guide to like Newt Scamander, if you think of it that way. I adored this. This is definitely not for everybody because it actually gets into legitimate like veterinary medicine. Like, he actually discusses the science behind a lot of like dosing of anesthesia and things like that and how it would pertain to a dragon versus a horse. It was so good, and I feel like only people who are in like the veterinary field could really appreciate a lot of the things, but then it made up for it with all the like fantastical beasts. Like, there was a bunny who grew wings. It was great. I loved this. I have already ordered volume 2 because I couldn't get enough of this. So way to welcome me to the manga world with such a solid, precious, wholesome little gem of a book. So I gave this 4 stars. The next book that I got to was Ramona Blue by Julie Murphy. I have always wanted to read this because I hear that it has good mental health representation in it, and it wasn't super prominent. That's like not the forefront of the story. I just thought this was such a great contemporary that I never hear talked about on BookTube specifically. I think it had its like glory days back when it came out because it's an older title, but this was such a good, mature teen contemporary. Like, it deals with like kind of a coming of age, questioning your sexuality, questioning your friendship, your family, where you stand in the world. It's one of those types of stories, but it just touches on so many things in such a realistic way. Like, I enjoyed this story so much, and I adored Ramona. She was such a great character. Like, she has blue hair, she's super tall, and she just owns it. Like, she is just such a great, sassy character. She's very much a Julie Murphy protagonist. Like, she is very similar to Dumplin' and Puddin', where she just, like, speaks her mind and doesn't care. And I feel like we need a lot more of that in YA, where we just need somebody who is very confident. Because I feel like we have an overabundance of representation of self-conscious protagonists. Because, let's be real, as young adults, we're all self-conscious. You're all worried about our role in the world, so it's very refreshing, especially for those young adults, those rare young adults who maybe own their role in life, to actually see that represented, and I loved it. It tackled poverty, it tackled life after a catastrophic event. Like, this follows, is it Hurricane Katrina? Hurricane Michael? Life after like FEMA has left basically, and you are still struggling to kind of bring your life back to what it was before a natural event happened. It was just really good. I really recommend it. I don't really know how to describe it better. That was a poor description. I realize that, but I gave it 4 stars. I highly recommend it. The next book that I got to was Bloom. This is a graphic novel by Kevin Panetta and Savannah Ganushow. I don't know. I pretty much read this because, one, I am 100% on board for the adorable, contemporary, cute, queer romances that are surfacing in the graphic novel world right now. So this is one of them. But I also read this because I did get to meet the author and get my book signed at Nova Teen. So that was partial incentive to get and read this. And this was so cute. Oh my god. So this is another coming of age story. That's what a majority of YA is, because we're all coming of age. But this follows a boy named Ari who is frustrated because he wants to go off and live his dream. He doesn't really know what he wants to do, but he just knows he wants to move away and play music with his band and live his own life, but he's kind of stuck with the idea that he has to take over his family's bakery. They kind of put that burden on him at a young age. His main ploy is to hire a replacement for himself so that he can like leave his parents in a good shape and go off with his friends and live his own life. So he hires this boy named Hector, and then a romance starts a brewing. It is so cute. So it's a male-male, adorable romance set in a bakery. It's just, it's precious. Rate it. It's 4 stars. I loved it. The next book I want to talk about is actually Bridget Kemmerer's latest release called Call It What You Want. This does not come out until June, so I might talk about it later on, but I did just read this because I just really wanted to. And also I met Bridget Kemmerer at a Polycon, so I wanted to talk to her about it. This is very much a Bridget Kemmerer book where we are following 2 characters who have serious dark obstacles that they are working and struggling to overcome, and they meet each other and they kind of heal through the bond of their relationship. That's kind of her standard plot for her contemporary, and I eat it up. I love it. I don't know why, I just do. So in this book, we are following Rob, who was a popular jock living his best life when his father was caught embezzling funds from the entire town. Not only does he have to deal with the wrath of everybody in town, struggling with losing a ton of money due to his family and them blaming him because they think that he knew that it was happening, but his father tried to commit suicide to prevent himself from going to jail because of this, and he failed. And now he kind of lives in a vegetative state, and Rob has to help take care of him. Rob is dealing with a tremendous amount of guilt and rage towards his father because not only did his father do this and he now has to take care of him, and it's hard to forgive him because he caused this like complete falling out with him and the rest of the town, but he has to like maintain this infant like state of a father figure. It's rough to read about, so there are some content warnings in that, obviously. And then our second character is Megan, who is a very typical overachiever, but she was caught cheating at the SATs, which means everyone else who was taking the SATs that day, their scores were negated. So everyone else is also really angry at her for doing that and causing that. So both of these people have a lot of guilt that they're working on overcoming, whether it was their fault or not. So they kind of start to bond through that. It was so well done. Her books are just so good. She writes such fascinating things into her stories. I just love them. So I gave this 4 stars. I'll probably talk about this more closer to release date to let you guys like get refreshed about what's going on. But I adore her books. They're just so damn good. Okay, and I'm down to my last 2 books. So the next book I want to talk about is A Woman Is No Man by E. Ephraim. This is the book of the month that I chose to read this month, and this was so hard to read. So this is a very harrowing and eye-opening experience looking into the lives of Palestinian women and how they are treated within their homes and outside of their homes. So this is an own voices representation. It goes through 3 generations of women as it follows a grandmother, a mother, and a daughter, and all of their separate experiences both in Palestine and in Brooklyn, New York, and how all of their experiences differ, but also how they relate being Palestinian and being in the Palestinian culture, and how hard it is to be a woman in that society, and how some women just kind of learn how to roll over and take it, and how some don't. And it was harrowing to read. Like, it was a rough look into it. I gave this 4 stars. I don't think the writing was phenomenal, but it was hard to read. So I feel like it was hard to put like beautiful prose in such a hard story. So I highly recommend this. eye-opening to a culture and a belief system that I really didn't know anything about, and it is still an ongoing issue in the world, so this will kind of open your eyes to the hardships that women are still dealing with in, like, New York City right now, in America. So definitely read this, but go in with some serious content warnings, I guess. Okay, and the final book that I have to talk about was my one 5-star book that I read this month, and we're going back to Bridget Kemmerer, and that is More Than We Can Tell. This is the companion novel to Letters to the Lost, which I read in February, and this is by far my favorite book by her. This was so good. This follows Rev, who we met in Letters to the Lost, and he was honestly my favorite character from that book, and all I wanted to know was more about him and less about the main characters, but we still saw Declan and Juliet in this book. So, like I just described her other book, we are following 2 characters. One, like I said, was Rev, who has a really hard backstory. He is an adopted foster child who has amazing parents, but also has a tremendous amount of guilt just from leaving his abusive father. His father was kind of a tyrannical religious leader figure who abused the hell out of him as a kid, and he managed to escape and get into the foster system and get put in a really good, loving family who adopted him. So he kind of has a happy ending, but he still has a lot of guilt over abandoning his father, because even though he was very brainwashed and he knew that, he still has this attachment to his father figure, and he still has a very intense belief system in religion that he falls back on. So that was so fascinating to read from. Like, I adored his entire story. He is such a great character. Like, he's one of the top YA characters I've ever read about. And then we follow his relationship with Megan, who is a closet nerd, basically. She has created an entire computer game from scratch. Like, her goal is to become a game programmer like her father, and she struggles with issues with her parents because her parents are going through kind of a separation, like they're not doing well together, and her dad is a game programmer, and she has a really good relationship with him and not so great with her mother, because her mother is pushing for her to not go into the gaming industry because it's a hard industry for women, and she thinks she should go into the medical field because it's a safer environment, even though it's really not. Like, it's a struggle that you read from. So it's kind of her experience creating this game, dealing with cyberbullying because she's a girl in the gaming environment, but also having her eyes opened to some of the things that her mom was saying that are very true. So it's their relationship. I adored it. I loved it so much. I gave it 5 stars. I'm going to be rereading this forever. Like, I just adore the story. I don't know why. It was just so well done. It was so well crafted. So as of right now, this is my favorite Bridget Kemmerer book. I think it's fantastic, and I highly recommend it. So those are the first 15 books that I want to talk about for my March wrap-up. Thank God that I split this wrap-up, because this video is already hella long. But if you guys are interested in my thoughts on some of the romance books, I read some solid romance this month. Like, stuff that actually talks about more than just, like, sex and lovey-dovey stuff. Like, it had really good content in it. So if you guys are interested in that, I will be uploading part 2 soonish. It'll be the next video that you guys see. As always, hit subscribe if you guys are interested in my reading tastes and seeing where my reading journey takes me. Let me know down in the comments what you guys read in March. What was your favorite book that you read in March? These are mine, like this section of the cart. Not so much this section, this one. So let me know what you guys read in the month of March, and I hope you guys enjoyed this. I will see you guys in my next video.